There's no question in my mind that Jameis Winston is one of the most hotly discussed NFL draft prospects we've seen in quite some time. Going back to Andrew Luck, going back to Cam Newton, going all the way back to the quarterback class of 2004, and in particular, Eli Manning. The media loves them some Jameis Winston. The fans love to talk about some Jameis Winston. And there's reasons for that. You're talking about a guy that only played 2 years at Florida State, but he made them count. The 2013 Heisman Trophy winner. He led that great Seminoles team to an undefeated season and a national championship in 2013. Lost only one game in 2 seasons. That's something. One game in 2 seasons, and that loss came in the national semifinal in this year's college football playoff to Marcus Mariota and the Oregon Ducks. One game lost in 2 seasons. So Jameis Winston is incredibly notable as a player and as a prospect for what he accomplished on the field, but also for what he's done off the field. He's been his own worst enemy at times. He's been all types of stupid on several different levels, and that's what's made him such a popular prospect to talk about. Now, with that said, trying to cut through all the bullshit, trying to cut through all the media propaganda and the media hype, we get to Jameis Winston, the prospect. And what do I think about Jameis Winston and his position in the 2015 NFL draft and what type of NFL quarterback he will ultimately be? Well, I'm about to tell you. Now, I'll tell you flat out, there are some very, very, very impressive things to look at when it comes to Jameis Winston as a prospect and trying to project him to the NFL level and evaluating him as a quarterback prospect. First and foremost, obviously, he fits the mold of the modern dual-threat quarterback, a guy that can beat you both with his arms and with his legs, and he proved that throughout his 2 years as a starting quarterback for the Florida State Seminoles. What really stands out to me, though, when I watch Jameis Winston on film is that this guy has the knack to make some truly special throws. You know, it's nice when we talk about the routine throws, and you have to be able to make those, and there are times where Jameis makes those, and there are other times where he's a little lacking in that area. But sometimes you just have to make those truly special throws. Those throws that really make the difference. Those throws that could be momentum and game changers. And over the past 2 years at Florida State, I saw Jameis Winston do that on several different occasions. When I sat there and would watch and I'd see a certain play, I'd say, oh my God, that's a big-time throw at the NFL level, let alone at the college level. What else I really love about Jameis Winston is that he's a fiery competitor and just oozes all types of leadership on the football field. This is the type of guy that has loads of courage in all aspects of his game. And as a Bears fan who's watched a quarterback like Jay Cutler stink up the joint with his lack of leadership and the lack of courage, and in particular the lack of desire and the lack of ability to play the best when the pressure's the hottest and the brightest. Jameis Winston has those characteristics in incredible abundance. The on-field intangibles are through the roof with this young man. Incredible on-field leadership, incredible loads of courage, and I love how he seems to step up and thrive in those big spots, in those big moments, and in those pressure situations. Because let's face it, as we found out in 2014, that Seminoles team wasn't nearly what it was in 2013. Yet time after time after time, even when Jameis wouldn't play that well in the first half, or hell, even through the first 3 quarters, he would somehow, some way, find a way to get it done and play his best when the spotlight and the pressure was the brightest. Those are the type of intangibles you can't coach. Those are the type of things that you can't teach. Those are the type of things that a quarterback prospect either has or doesn't have. And when it comes to having it, Jameis Winston has it in incredible abundance. Like I said, there are some things about Jameis Winston that absolutely leap off the film at me that I absolutely love about him as a prospect and as a player. But I have those things that really give me some reservation, that really give me some pause for concern. One would be his long throwing motion that tends to get a little longer when he needs to throw harder. A lot of people associate Jameis Winston with having this massive arm, and he doesn't. He has a good arm. He has an adequate arm, but it's not the strongest arm in the world. And it's not nearly as strong as many may lead you to believe. And what happens is when he needs to get more velocity on the ball, his throwing motion can get longer and end up getting slower and, overcorrecting for the increase in velocity on his throws that he's trying to get. I also have some concerns about his abilities to read zone coverage, especially in 2014. If you go back and watch all of his games, you see this on numerous occasions. He is horrendous at reading zone coverages, in particular linebackers underneath in said zone coverage. Many of his interceptions came off of that, the failure to recognize and properly read zones, and in particular linebackers underneath in help situations. He was brutal at it. I mean, and a big concern in general to me is if this guy is throwing 18 picks at the college level, how many picks is he going to throw at the NFL level? Sometimes he could be way too confident in his arm talent, way too confident in what he sees. Whereas Marcus Mariota, I think, sometimes sees the field well, sees it better than Winston, but doesn't always trust what he sees. I think Jameis Winston sometimes is too trusting in what he sees and is way too confident in his abilities and his arm. That confidence, that courage can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing, especially when you can't read zone defenses. And if you go back and watch the film, I don't give a fuck what you say. He's terrible at it. He's horrible at it. It's something that can be coached. It's something that can be improved upon. But it is a major knock that I have against Jameis Winston in his game as you project him to the NFL level. If he can't read those zones in college, he can't recognize where the corner is playing underneath or the linebacker is playing over the middle. How the hell is he going to do that at the NFL level where the athletes are better, the athletes are smarter, and the athletes are quicker and faster and longer? I'm just saying. I also have concerns about the system that he played in. For all this talk about Marcus Mariota and the system that he played in, and I understand that, I don't understand how all of a sudden we forget about the fact that he also played at a school that has recently produced first-round quarterbacks in Christian Ponder and E.J. Manuel. For years, we would knock Michigan wide receivers because of the failures of others, regardless of whether they were the same prospect as those that came before or not. Similar thing we're doing now with USC wide receivers and have done for years, whether they're always the same type of player or prospect or not. So what's so different here with Jameis Winston coming out of Jimbo Fisher's Florida State offense, knowing that Christian Ponder and E.J. Manuel flatly, for the most part, have both fallen flat on their faces at the NFL level? If Mariota is a system quarterback, I don't give a damn what you say. What the hell does that make Jameis Winston? And why the hell wouldn't you be at least a little bit concerned about that? And frankly, why aren't more people talking about this? We do when it comes to USC wide receivers. Why aren't we talking about this when we have recent history to indicate that Florida State quarterbacks don't translate that well to the NFL level? But of course, the biggest question of all when it comes to Jameis Winston is about his maturity. It's about whether or not he's a knucklehead. It's about whether or not he's going to keep himself out of trouble off the field. And if he's the type of guy that you could deal with and coach on the field. Sometimes Jameis Winston's biggest enemy, both on and off the field, is Jameis Winston. And is that something that's going to change as he matures and gets older as a man? Or is this something that we've seen at the college level that is an indicator of future troubles ahead, especially when you give them the keys to your franchise and millions upon millions of guaranteed dollars? So when it comes to NFL comparisons and trying to project to how Jameis Winston will fare in the NFL, names you'll hear, names from the past like Steve McNair and maybe Donovan McNabb, modern names like a Cam Newton. I can see some of that, and I understand those comparisons. Here's what I see in Jameis Winston. I see a big, athletic quarterback who has an arm that many people think is stronger than it actually is, that makes at times some really, really poor decisions. His accuracy at times on the basic throws can be very lacking and really struggles to read zone coverages. When I see Jameis Winston as a prospect, I see Blake Bortles. Yes, that's right, I said it. Blake Bortles. Now, most certainly, I think Jameis Winston is going to be a far better NFL player than Blake Bortles. But when it comes to comparison and when it comes to similarities in prospects, when I've been searching and struggling for a while to figure out who exactly Jameis Winston reminds me of the most, the guy he reminds me of the most is Blake Bortles. When it comes to Jameis Winston, I think he's the second best quarterback in this 2015 NFL draft class. I grade Mariota higher than him. I think Mariota has more upside, and I also trust Mariota more than I do Jameis Winston. When you look at Jameis Winston, I mean, we're talking about a guy that has a previous rape charge. We're talking about a guy who got busted for stealing crab legs. We're talking about a guy who stood up in the middle of a commons area and says, "Fuck her right in the pussy." While that part is funny, and Mariota, yes, once got a big speeding ticket, I understand. We can't compare Mariota off the field to Jameis Winston. Mariota is a much safer pick. He's a much more trustworthy pick. There are all types of questions here about Jameis Winston, especially when I look at the fact when he showed up to the combine, he showed up at 231. He had to lose 17 pounds to get there. So what is his offseason dedication like? And is he always going to have weight problems? And this whole perception of people had of Winston was so much bigger than Mariota. Well, when they showed up to the combine, you clearly see that that wasn't the case. My biggest concern, though, with Jameis Winston is, does he get it? Does he understand the potential that he has? Does he get how he's been his own worst enemy? Does he understand that he can't be that man anymore once he gets to the NFL level? I have one guarantee with Jameis Winston, is that he will be a franchise changer. He will either become a top 10 or maybe even top 5 quarterback in the National Football League, or he'll be a guy that is his own worst enemy, that throws too many interceptions, doesn't work nearly as hard as he should, can't stay out of trouble, and sets a franchise back 5 years. There's going to be no middle ground with Jameis Winston. I hope that he becomes that first part, because he has that type of potential. He has that type of talent. But I also fear that he could become that second part, that guy that really sets an organization back for years. I really do. I fear that. I hope he's the first, but I believe he could be the second. With that said, though, if you're a team picking in the top 5 or top 10 in this draft, you have to gamble if you have a need at quarterback. You have to gamble on Jameis Winston, because that upside is still there. And while not as big, in my opinion, as Marcus Mariota, the upside is still there, and this guy could be a big-time NFL franchise-changing quarterback. And if you're picking in the top 5 or top 10 consistently, it's probably because you lack that type of player. You've got to gamble on the bad and hope for all the good. And here's what I will say in defense of Jameis Winston, just to show you what type of quarterback experts we can all be. This is the same NFL where Dan Marino was once the 6th quarterback taken in the 1983 draft, behind such legends as Todd Blackledge and Tony Eason. And Ken O'Brien, too. No disrespect, Mr. O'Brien. This is also the same NFL where several teams preferred Ryan Leaf over Peyton Manning in 1998. This is the same NFL where Tom Brady was the 199th pick in the 2000 NFL draft, going after guys like Spurgeon Wynn and Giovanni Carmazzi and Chris Bredman. This is the same NFL where Drew Brees was taken with the first pick of the 2nd round by the San Diego Chargers in 2001 because people thought at 6 foot maybe he was a little too short to play quarterback. This is the same NFL where Aaron Rodgers was once taken 24 picks after Alex Smith in 2005 because they thought Aaron Rodgers was a system quarterback. This is the same NFL where Tony Romo was undrafted out of Eastern Illinois, but a Jamarcus Russell was the #1 overall pick in 2007. This is also the same NFL where Russell Wilson was a 3rd-round pick and the Seahawks were roundly blasted for it because they had just signed Matt Flynn in free agency. Sometimes it just goes to show you we think we know and we don't know. So for all the Jameis Winston ass-kissers that assume and guarantee that he's going to be the man, how the fuck do you know? And frankly, at this point in time, for the ones that are questioning or have concerns about Winston like me, what the fuck do we know? Ultimately, only time is going to tell. I think he's the 2nd-best quarterback in this draft class. I still think he's worth a top 10 pick. And I make one guarantee, if nothing else. There will be no middle ground. One way or another, Jameis Winston will be a franchise changer, even more so than Marcus Mariota at the NFL level.